11:42 a.m. You're driving to pick up lunch, radio on, window cracked, thinking about absolutely nothing. 11:42 a.m. and 14 seconds. The car to your left drifts 3 feet without signaling. 11:42 a.m. and 16 seconds. Impact. The whole thing takes less time than it takes your brain to consciously register that something is wrong, which is exactly the problem. Because in those 16 seconds, your nervous system didn't wait for your permission. It was already rewriting itself. And it will keep rewriting itself for months after the airbag deflates, the glass settles, and everyone walks away saying they feel fine. They are not fine. Here is what nobody tells you at the scene. While you're standing on the sidewalk with a cop asking if you hit your head, the crash isn't over. It just moved inside. Let's start with the part that sounds impossible. Most people assume that what damages the brain in a crash is the force of your skull hitting something. The steering wheel, the headrest, the window. Linear force, the jolt forward and back. That makes intuitive sense. It is also almost completely wrong. The real killer is rotation. When your head snaps in any direction during impact, your brain doesn't just move, it twists. And because your brain has the structural integrity of cold butter, that twist generates strain across the tissue in a way that straight-line force almost never does. Rotational acceleration in a crash can reach 9.4 thousand radians per second squared. That number is meaningless until you picture what it actually does. Your brain wrings itself like a wet towel, one hemisphere pulling slightly ahead of the other. Axons, the long communication cables connecting neurons, stretching past the point of no return. Rotational forces account for over 80% of all brain strain in a vehicle crash. Translational force, the forward jolt everyone obsesses over, contributes almost nothing to the actual tissue damage. A crash can register 6 times the force of gravity in linear acceleration and produce near zero measurable strain. Add rotation, and suddenly 30% of your total brain volume is in the damage zone. 30% of your entire brain. In a side impact especially, the cumulative strain damage doesn't announce itself with a headache or a blackout. It arrives quietly in the days and weeks after as processing speed drops, word retrieval stutters, and you stare at a sentence you've read 4 times and still can't tell me what it said. Your brain just got wrung out. And nobody checked for that at the scene. Now, here's where it gets stranger. While your brain tissue was physically deforming, a completely separate system was simultaneously making a very different kind of decision. And this one will follow you to the grocery store 6 months from now. Your amygdala, the almond-shaped threat detection cluster, buried deep in your temporal lobe, activated at a speed that makes conscious thought look like it's moving through concrete. Before your prefrontal cortex, the part of you that reasons, evaluates, and decides, had any chance to assess the situation, the amygdala had already tagged every sensory detail of that moment as survival critical. The smell of the airbag, the specific pitch of the impact sound, the angle of light through the windshield, the feeling of your seatbelt locking against your sternum like a fist. All of it branded into your hippocampus with the neurochemical equivalent of a soldering iron. This is why trauma memory doesn't work like regular memory. Regular memory is reconstructive. You rebuild it each time, softening edges, losing details. Trauma memory is architectural. It doesn't rebuild, it replays. And the amygdala doesn't just store it, it stays hot, scanning every future environment for anything that resembles those sensory fragments. A car door slams 2 rows over in a parking garage. Your chest seizes, your hands tighten. You're not being dramatic. Your amygdala just cross-referenced a sound file and triggered a full-body alarm response before your conscious mind even registered the noise. You're reacting to a memory your brain filed under, "You almost died here. Congratulations. You've been indexed." And the prefrontal cortex, the part that could talk the amygdala down, contextualize the threat, run some basic probability math, is running at reduced capacity after a traumatic event. Hyperactive amygdala, suppressed prefrontal cortex. It's like removing the brakes from a car that's already accelerating. Neuroimaging after road traffic accidents shows exactly this pattern, and that pattern is one of the strongest predictors of who develops PTSD. Not who was most frightened, not who hit hardest, who shows amygdala hyperactivity and prefrontal suppression in the days immediately after. That's the scan that tells the real story. Here's the number that should make you put your phone down. Over 27% of motor vehicle accident survivors develop depression or major depressive disorder. More than 1 in 4 people who walk away from a crash find themselves 3 months later unable to explain why they can't get out of bed. They don't connect it to the crash. The crash was months ago. They're physically healed. But their brain got rewired in 16 seconds, and nobody gave them the manual for the new wiring. The depression isn't a reaction to the trauma in the way we typically imagine. Grief, fear, shock fading slowly. It's partly structural. Sustained amygdala hyperactivity disrupts sleep architecture, which disrupts the glymphatic system, your brain's overnight cleaning crew, which means the metabolic waste products that accumulate during stress don't get cleared. You wake up more depleted than you went to sleep. Repeat for 90 days, and you have a brain that is chemically, measurably, not the same organ it was before the crash. One violent jolt. Months of downstream wreckage. So what do you actually do with this? Because understanding the mechanism is only half the job. The other half is knowing how to interrupt it before the rewiring becomes permanent. Picture this. It's 2 weeks after the crash. You're in the passenger seat of a friend's car, perfectly safe, familiar neighborhood, and your body is doing the wet towel thing again. Shoulders locked, teeth sealed like a vault. Every red light feels like a countdown. Your amygdala is running threat pattern recognition on every intersection. Here's what you do in that moment, and it works because of the specific way somatosensory input competes with amygdala activation. You press the soles of your feet flat against the floor of the car. Hard. You feel the texture of the mat, the firmness beneath it, the slight vibration of the road. You're not doing this to calm down. You're doing it because sustained tactile pressure from the feet activates the posterior parietal cortex, which directly competes with the amygdala somatosensory feedback loop that's keeping the alarm running. You're interrupting the circuit with your own body weight. No app, no medication, no breathing exercise, just the architecture of competing sensory inputs, and the fact that your brain cannot fully process a grounded physical sensation and a threat simulation simultaneously. The amygdala is loud, but it is not the only voice in the room. The same principle applies in the weeks after a crash when the visual system starts misfiring. Because here's the part nobody expects. Trauma from a road accident specifically hyperactivates your visual cortex. The occipital regions, the inferior temporal gyrus, the areas that process what you see, go into overdrive when exposed to anything that even loosely resembles the crash context. Your brain starts rendering the world in higher threat contrast. Headlights are brighter. Movement in your peripheral vision is faster. You're not imagining it. Your visual processing system was told by a very persuasive amygdala to stop missing things. So it stopped missing things, including things that aren't there. That's not anxiety. That's neuroplasticity doing exactly what it was designed to do, in a context it was never designed for. The practical move here is deliberate exposure, not avoidance, which the amygdala loves because avoidance confirms the threat. You sit in a parked car, not driving, not moving. You feel the seat, the wheel, the vibration of the engine if you start it. You're feeding the hippocampus new, non-catastrophic data from the same sensory environment that got burned in. The brain updates its predictions based on what actually happens. What actually happens is nothing. You're just sitting in a car. Do it 3 days in a row and the amygdala's activation profile for interior of a vehicle starts to downgrade. Not because you forced yourself to be brave, because you gave your threat detection system updated information, and it's actually pretty good at math when you stop starving it of evidence. You walked away from the crash. The crash did not walk away from you. Not yet. Not automatically. It set up residence in your tissue and your threat memory architecture, and it's waiting to see what you do next. Most people do nothing. They wait to feel normal again. They white-knuckle the highway on-ramp and tell themselves it'll pass. Sometimes it does. Sometimes 27% of them are still waiting 3 months later, wondering why everything feels grey. Your brain recorded the crash in every sense it had. Sound, light, pressure, smell, the specific G-force geometry of a world suddenly going sideways. It will keep playing that recording until you give it a reason to file it under survived instead of ongoing. The crash lasted 2 seconds. The recording lasts exactly as long as you let it run unopposed. You survived the impact. Now you have to survive what the impact left behind. And that job starts the moment you stop calling yourself fine.